The sea gave no warning. One moment the strait was empty. The next, 900 men were crossing in the dark, heading for 40. Batong Puti was not a fortress. It was a repurposed Coast Guard relay station on a nameless Philippine shoreline, salt-corroded and quietly forgotten by the logistics chain above it. 43 operators from Naval Special Operations Command's Maritime Strike Group 7 had arrived 3 weeks earlier for a 96-hour presence tasking that had quietly become something else. Their supplies had been rationed down to the margins. Their satellite uplink was weather-degraded. Their last confirmed contact with forward headquarters had been 6 hours before the sea began to move. Senior Chief Petty Officer Danilo Reyes stood on the northern wall with a thermal monocular on the evening of November 14th, and felt something that experienced operators described the same way regardless of where they trained. The darkness was listening. That was how he would later put it. Not silence. Something heavier than silence. A quality of attention coming off the water that his body registered before his mind could name it. He keyed his radio and said 3 words to Lieutenant Commander Armand Pasquale in the operations room below. Something is out there. Pasquale had already reached the same conclusion. Petty Officer Lourdes Monago had intercepted fragmented burst transmissions on a flag frequency 30 minutes earlier, originating from multiple dispersed points southwest of the outpost. Triangulation placed the sources 4 to 6 kilometers out. The fragmentation pattern across the signals indicated not one vessel, but a distributed formation communicating in coordinated sequence, closing on a single point. Pasquale pulled his section leaders into the operations room, a space the size of a large closet, and gave them 4 minutes. The operational picture required very few words to describe. 43 operators, 60% of primary ammunition remaining, 2 M2 HB heavy machine guns, each at 44%, 1 60mm mortar with 31 rounds, 6 Claymore mines already in place on the beach approaches, 1 independent duty corpsman, 1 degraded satellite uplink, 1 backup HF radio, a perimeter designed for observation, not for holding ground against a force of unknown, but substantial size. Pasquale finished the assessment and looked at the men around him. He said what commanders say when analysis has reached its limit and the situation has resolved itself into something simpler. We hold the ground we are standing on. The beach below Batong Puti was 240 meters of irregular shoreline broken by coral outcroppings, 2 shallow inlet channels, and a collapsed dock structure the sea had been reclaiming for 3 years. Over the preceding weeks, the detachment had modified this ground without drama, not fortification. Attention. Small choices made by people who understood that terrain is the first weapon available to any defender. The claymores covered the inlet channels and the most navigable approach on the western beach. Their command detonators sat at positions with clear sight lines. The operators who held them had been briefed to wait for concentration. The 2 heavy machine guns covered overlapping field of fire across 160 meters of the most likely landing zone, creating what military planners call a beaten zone, a place where movement carried a consistent cost. 2 designated marksmen with State Route 25 rifles were positioned on elevated corners of the inner structure. Their role was not suppression. It was disruption, command figures, communication equipment, the removal of nodes rather than numbers. At 2,241 hours, the lead vessels reached the coral shelf and their engines dropped idle. The beach went quiet. Then the first craft ran aground on the sand, and the night changed. The initial wave did not rush. Groups of 20 to 30 individuals spread laterally along the waterline before moving forward, extending the defensive frontage, reducing target density in any single firing arc. It was not the movement of an untrained crowd. The first claymore was initiated at 2,247 hours, when approximately 60 individuals compressed into the eastern inlet channel. The effect was immediate. The subsequent 3 minutes were defined by the Northeast M2HB and the Eastern Perimeter operators working in close coordination. The first wave stalled. The second wave was already in the water. Petty Officer Second Class Marco Villanueva, 26 years old and assigned to the Eastern Wall, would later describe what he saw in a way that people describe things they are still working to understand. It looked like the water was moving, not people, just the water itself moving forward toward the wall. Pasquale moved along the inner perimeter during the second wave, not directing fire, reading pressure, identifying where the geometry was about to fail before it failed. He identified the eastern inlet as the point requiring reinforcement. He moved Reyes and 2 additional operators to the eastern arc. This was the first compression of the perimeter. It would not be the last. Each compression meant fewer operators covering more ground somewhere else. Fire discipline became the second battle being fought simultaneously with the physical one. The instinct under sustained incoming fire is to shoot more. The training required to shoot less is one the human nervous system continues to contest in the actual moment. Reyes moved along the eastern wall, calling shots. Not dramatically, functionally. Pick your target. 1 round. Confirm. Next, it became the rhythm of the arc, and it held the arc together longer than mathematics suggested it should. At 0043 hours, the primary ammunition for the Northeast M2HB was expended. The 2-man crew transitioned to their M4S without direction. The heavy gun silence on the eastern approach was felt within minutes as incoming pressure increased. The 3rd Claymore was initiated on the eastern beach. Its effect was real but not decisive. The volume of personnel pressing through the inlet exceeded what the remaining operators could suppress at a sustainable rate of fire. The outer perimeter's eastern segment was breached at 0057 hours through a section where 2 operators had been wounded and movement had not been fully covered in the interval of the repositioning. Approximately 30 individuals entered the narrow corridor between the outer and inner walls. What followed in that corridor was close, fast, and decided by training applied in near total darkness. 3 additional operators were wounded. The incursion was contained within 11 minutes. Corpsman Renato Soriano worked through the engagement without interruption from the operations room that had become the casualty collection point. He would treat 9 operators for wounds of varying severity over the course of the night. None of the wounds sustained in the first 4 hours were fatal. This was not luck. It was body armor, immediate buddy care, tourniquets applied before casualties were moved, and 1 corpsman who did not stop working. At 0112 hours, Monago reestablished satellite contact with NAVSOCOM forward headquarters in Zamboanga. The message he received confirmed that a response force had been tasked and was en route. Estimated arrival, 140 minutes. Pasquale received this information, acknowledged it, and returned to the perimeter. 140 minutes was a number, not a solution. The solution was still the 40-some operators on the walls with whatever ammunition remained in their pouches. At some point after 0130 hours, Pasquale made a decision that would generate the most discussion in the after-action analysis conducted by the Doctrine Division in the months that followed. He took 6 operators off the defensive perimeter and sent them out. The logic was this. Large forces are not inherently coherent forces. 3 hours of sustained casualties against unexpected resistance create organizational stress that moves backward through a command structure faster than reinforcements move forward. The 6 operators were the 2 designated marksmen and 4 of the most experienced close-quarters personnel in the detachment. They moved over the western wall, descended the coral formation that gave the outpost its name, entered the shallow water, and moved south. Their objective was not destruction. It was uncertainty. They would find the raider command nodes and make the force behind the assault unsure about what was approaching from the direction it had left unguarded. What followed over approximately 40 minutes, the operators described with the economy of people who understand that the significant thing about what they did was not its drama, but its measurable effect on the behavior of 900 people. At 0152 hours, the pressure on the northern and eastern walls decreased. Elements that had been pressing forward began to reorient south. Command communication intercepts recovered afterward showed a period of organizational confusion lasting approximately 25 minutes. 25 minutes is a long time when you are managing wounded personnel, a compromised eastern arc, and an ammunition situation that has moved from critical to terminal. It was enough time to matter. The final assault came at approximately 0230 hours. It was not the largest push of the night, but it was the most consolidated. as though the raider organization had gathered its remaining capacity and made a final determination about the outpost. The 60mm mortar fired its last rounds at 0232 hours, targeting the concentration of vessels in the shallow water. The effect was partial. The remaining inventory was insufficient for the density of what was still in the surf. The Southwest M2HB, its crew having been precise about ammunition management throughout the entire engagement, was still operational. It now carried the suppression burden for the full beach frontage alone. Its crew did not stop. Reyes later said that the last 45 minutes of the engagement was the closest thing to silence he had experienced in a combat environment, not because the noise had stopped, because there was nothing left to decide. Every choice had already been made or could not be changed. The remaining rounds would be expended. The perimeter would hold or it would not. At a certain point you stop defending a position, and you are simply present in it. At 0318 hours, the Southwest M2HB crew reported their ammunition as expended. At 0341 hours, the raider force began its withdrawal. It was not a collapse. It was an organized disengagement. Vessels pulling back from the beach in a sequence that suggested command control had been partially reasserted despite everything the night had taken from them. The withdrawal lasted at approximately 40 minutes. The last vessel cleared the outer coral shelf as the sky to the east began its slow transition from black to the gray that comes before dawn, but is not yet dawn. The Philippine Navy Response Force arrived at 0507 hours. 2 fast craft from the Special Boat Squadron, carrying a reinforcement element and medical personnel, made the approach in first light and found 43 operators at their positions. 11 had been wounded. None had been killed. The beach below the outpost told the rest of the story in a way that beaches do after the water recedes and the light returns, and what remains simply lies there without explanation. The raider force's casualties, reconstructed from partial data in the weeks that followed, were estimated at between 140 and 180 individuals killed or wounded seriously enough to require removal from the beach. Their dead had been recovered by their own organization during the withdrawal. This detail was noted in the subsequent analysis as evidence of a force that retained enough discipline and cohesion in defeat to care for what it could carry back across the water. The after-action report produced by NAVSOCOM's Doctrine Division circulated through the Philippine military establishment and reached counterpart organizations through formal channels. It addressed ammunition prepositioning, perimeter design, counter-sortie doctrine, and communications redundancy in isolated forward positions. Batong Puti was subsequently designated a permanent forward operating location. The decision had apparently been under consideration for some time. The engagement accelerated it. The outpost that had been designed to watch was now resourced to hold. Senior Chief Reyes, asked what he would want people to understand about that night, was quiet for a moment before he answered. We were doing the job we were given, in the place we were standing. The sea does not care how many of you there are.